I think we are in kind of the end of the beginning in a way. The momentum is beginning to build beyond just people on the front lines or people who are in the streets, but it's building to the point where you have governments who are beginning to think about their futures very seriously. We have corporations that are beginning to think about their futures very seriously. I think at a certain point, Wall Street is going to wonder, well, if this continues, what does this mean for earnings? We've seen over the last few days where Wall Street, the markets have moved up and down with every report about coronavirus or the Federal Reserve. Well, if there is progress made, say, in law enforcement reform in some of the big cities of this country, that's going to move Wall Street, too. I mean, we even heard the report from The Hollywood Reporter that The Bachelor is going to have its first black bachelor. The show's been on the air for 18 years, and there's never been anyone but a white guy who's been considered the most dateable dude in America. That may sound minor, but what it means is that this movement is moving in many ways. Victor Hugo once said, "There's no force in the world so powerful as an idea whose time has come." And I think the fact that there are people of all colors, including lots of white people at the top of C lists, of the C-level executives of companies, who are saying this is happening. This is happening. So the momentum is coming in lots of ways. The question is, whose momentum will end up deciding the direction that this movement goes from here? That has yet to be determined.
And Tim, is the message or the momentum at risk of being hijacked? The president and some others are exaggerating what things like defund the police even mean, or in harping on ideas that are not part of mainstream demands, like abolishing police forces entirely. Is keeping demands realistic a key part of what keeps this movement alive?
Yeah, sure. I think so. And look, to be clear, the politics of this are moving inexorably in one direction. And everyone understands that. The president's pollsters understand that. Leading Republicans on Capitol Hill understand that, even if they're not willing to acknowledge it publicly yet. But the cultural and the political momentum here is moving in one direction, and it's picking up steam. And so for the president to try and latch on to defund police, or even some of these peripheral conversations about abolishing police forces. He sees political advantage there, but that's a short-term play ultimately. It's not sustainable. If you talk with the leading Republican lawmakers and consultants in this country, they have recognized over the last 10 days how quickly the ground is shifting beneath their feet. And they understand not only what that means for this election cycle, but for many election cycles to come. And the reality is Donald Trump is not going to be president forever. There is going to be a post-Trump Republican Party, and there are ambitious young Republicans who are now seriously rethinking their approach to these issues of racial justice, because they know that to expand the appeal of the party moving forward, this is going to have to be a part of the conversation moving forward. They can no longer afford to ignore it.
Okay, they may be thinking it, but they ain't saying much. Cornel, the president wants to make this argument a binary one. You're either with the police or you support anarchy and lawlessness. That is not fact-based. It's not anywhere near a solution that the majority of Americans want. So how do you solve for that?
Well, I think you got to get out there with a message that calls out the false choice. But before I go there, I have to pivot back to the last report about sort of where the president is having his rally. Because Stephanie, it's not just that he's having his rally on Juneteenth, but he's having his rally at what we all know as Black Wall Street, once upon a time Black Wall Street, and the Tulsa Massacre, right? So what kind of signaling is he doing when he's doing this on Juneteenth, and he's doing it in Tulsa, where famously, Black Wall Street was, and there was a massacre there. I mean, it does remind me of Ronald Reagan going to Philadelphia, Mississippi, site of the infamous civil rights murders, and talking about states' rights. I think it is abhorrent, the signaling that the president is doing right now, and I don't think that can be excused. And this doubling down on racism and division. Look, he can lock in that 46% of voters who are very anxious about the changes that are happening in this country. But certainly that's not the future. And we certainly have to stop sowing the seeds of racism, because we're reaping the harvest with people on the streets and with violence and America coming apart.
Joshua, is the power of this movement and the broad-based support that it has so strong that it's not going to get gridlocked in the culture war that the president will try to create, whether he's talking about movies or TV shows? We often find ourselves getting hooked to the sidelined in this culture war gridlock. Can we get away from that this time?
Well, Stephanie, I don't know if those two things need to be separate. I mean, part of what racism includes, to Cornell's point about the president's rally, is the contention that certain things can be allowed to be out of bounds because they're not that big a deal. Like, I'm sure when I mentioned The Bachelor, I'm sure there were people across the country who rolled their eyes immediately, like, I thought we were talking about the news. The Bachelor is just some goofy reality show. No, it is our standard of beauty. It is our standard of lovability. It is our ability to look at Black women and women of color and say, see, you are just as desirable as white women. Black men, see, you're just as desirable as Black men. The idea of removing Gone with the Wind from HBO Max until it can be posted with culturally contextual information is part of the same movement that says, no, the images of Black and brown people matter and context matters. Now, I'm not worried about that. Warner Brothers has dealt with that before when they had to remove some of the Looney Tunes cartoons from their DVD collections and then post those again with a note saying removing these would be like saying they never existed. So we're posting them as they are so you can see them as they were. To say that this could be hijacked by other things, I understand the concern, but all of these things are wrapped in together. Carter G. Woodson, the guy who created what was Negro History Week, what is now Black History Month, wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. And in that book, he wrote, among other things, if you can control what a man will think, you need not concern yourself with what he will do. If you can make a man feel inferior, you do not need to order him to seek an inferior status. He'll seek it himself. And if you can make a man feel justly an outcast, you do not need to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, then his very nature will demand one. All of these things are connected. This whole agenda is connected. So perhaps the concern is not that other things will get in the way. Perhaps the concern is that other things can't get in, and we will view them as being in the way.
If every advertisement has the boss, a white guy, making the money, running the meeting, well, then our kids will grow up thinking that that's the person who gets to run the world. Tim, you wrote a great piece in Politico about all of this, and I want to share one of the quotes about this moment in time, and it's from Republican Karl Rove, where he said, do white Americans feel the same pressure that Black and brown families do? Do white families fear their kids will be pulled over for no reason other than the color of their skin? No. So they'll never relate in exactly the same way. But I do think they relate a lot more than they did 10 or 20 years ago. And I do think that changes the party to some degree moving forward. Talk to us about how white America is now relating more to Black America this time.
Well, look, the polling on this over the last 10 days or so has just been remarkable. And I said to a colleague the other day, we were crunching some of the different numbers from some of the different pollsters, and I said, at this rate, this is going to make same-sex marriage look like a century-long struggle. The movement here is unbelievable. Just one example, Monmouth polled the American electorate back in 2014 after Eric Garner was killed by the New York Police Department. And at that time, they asked the question, do you believe that the police are more likely to use excessive force against Black people than against the rest of the population? 33% of Americans believed that. Only 26% of white Americans believed that. That was 6 years ago. Fast forward to today. In the wake of George Floyd's killing, Monmouth asked that same question. 57% of Americans now believe it, and 49% of whites. Frank Luntz, another prominent Republican consultant, focus group guru, he tweeted out that part of my story and said, look, I've been polling for 30 plus years and I have never seen this kind of movement. It's unprecedented. And so I do think that what you're going to see from the Republican Party specifically, which has long chosen to sort of ignore these issues and pretend as though they don't really exist and certainly not address them in an overt way, they are now left with no choice but to begin addressing them. And that starts not with Donald Trump, because we know what the president is all about. We know who he is. We know he's not going to change. But as I said a moment ago, it does start with that younger generation of Republicans who are beginning to think about what the party looks like when he leaves office and how in many ways they begin to pick up the pieces and move forward.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.